Hello friends, and welcome to part 2, What Does Atheism Teach? This is bound to be controversial, but follow me and you'll see that it's completely logical. First, let's take a look at the faith of atheism. Beginning with the starting point of my definition of atheist. An atheist is an individual person who chooses to affirm the statement there are no gods as true. Well, what logically follows for that worldview? What becomes the bigger picture of the atheistic worldview? What must an atheist believe to be a consistent atheist? Now, it is possible to be inconsistent. For instance, a person can believe that God made the world in 6 days 6,000 years ago, just as Genesis describes, and that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. I have seen fourth graders that have both of those beliefs in their head, but they keep them compartmentalized so that they never touch. And if they thought about them, they'd realize that both of those can't be true at the same time. So similarly, there are probably a lot of people calling themselves atheists who will reject some or more of these beliefs. But as you will see, the beliefs all follow logically from the starting point. So starting again with my definition of atheism, there is no God or gods. Therefore, there is no supernatural, no spirits, no afterlife, etc. No argument could be made against the existence of God which would still allow for the supernatural. Thus, materialism, a belief that nothing exists except the physical universe of time, space, matter, and energy. Thus, no miracles or magic, for there is nothing and no one to cause a miracle in a material universe. Thus, determinism. All things and events are determined and controlled by the laws of physics and chemistry and all that follow from them. Thus, everything since the beginning of time has been predetermined by those natural laws, physics and chemistry. Everything has always been and must always be as it is because of those initial conditions and could not have been different. So how is an atheist like a toaster? If atheism was true, that means that an atheist is like a toaster because their function is entirely determined by their chemical makeup and structure, every part made of atoms obeying laws of physics and chemistry. I totally toasted that Pop-Tart. Hero talk. If the Bible is true, an atheist is like a toaster because they were created by an intelligence and with a purpose. That's an important distinction, but I digress. What do atheists say about this? This is not just a straw man argument being put up by me, but I will show you that atheists, in the name of atheism, have defended these positions that I'm putting forward, from Will Provine, and he says naturalistic evolution has clear consequences that Charles Darwin understood perfectly. 1. No gods worth having exist. So there's your atheist. There are no gods. Number 2, no life after death. No supernatural. Number 3, no ultimate foundation for ethics exists. I will talk about that in just a moment. Number 4, no ultimate meaning in life exists. And 5, human free will is non-existent. This is William Provine, professor of biological sciences at Cornell University. Remember all of the things that he has said because it follows logically from my starting point. So starting with my definition of atheism, we have come to this point, thus no free will. For a free choice cannot be a caused choice, but the will of man is merely the result of his brain, which is matter, which is controlled and determined by the natural laws. You are a toaster. To see why atheists can't be free thinkers, again, Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss talk about this very thing in the video I've got linked there. I'll put a link up so you can see that online. But the things that I'm saying here are taught by atheists about their own worldview. Now, some may appeal to the quantum uncertainty and to allow for free will, but this is a false hope, for the uncertainty is merely our ignorance of all the causal determiners at the quantum level, not actual randomness. And even if it were actual randomness, it is not our minds that choose the random outcome of the quantum uncertainty on a macro level, but our will would be a result of that uncertainty. Once again, our choices would be caused, even if not predictable. To see more about what I'm talking about here, to understand the quantum uncertainty and all that, go ahead and check out Veritasium's What is Not Random. The point is, your brain, if it is made of matter, and that's all your mind is the matter of your brain, then everything you think and feel and believe and do is predetermined by the chemical makeup of your brain and the laws of physics, just as what a toaster does is entirely determined by its chemical makeup and the laws of physics and chemistry. Thus, there can be no objective right and wrong. If we cannot choose to think or feel or do, thus we cannot choose to do other than we do. Our thoughts and actions are determined by chemistry and physics, just as the shape of a rock is. Condemning a murder would be like condemning a toaster for making the toast too dark. Why does a toaster make the toast too dark? It's just that one knob has been turned from 1 over to 5, the lever's pushed down, it does what it has to do because it is built in a certain way. The brain of a murderer or any other criminal has a certain chemical composition in a certain arrangement, which results in that action. So 7b, also with no transcendent moral lawgiver, God, there can be no objective moral law by which to distinguish between right and wrong, even if we could choose. And again, William Provine just made that point. Number 8. Also, there is no justification for condemning any action as wrong or celebrating any as right. Murder is merely the interruption of various chemical processes which we categorize as life. The victim's desire to live is not based on a free choice, the choice to continue living, but is predetermined by natural law just as his hair color or his height were. The same can be said for any act of justice, mercy, or charity. In this atheistic worldview, there is nothing but matter. There is no spirit, there is no self outside of the brain, and the brain is merely a machine made of certain chemical elements in a particular arrangement doing what it has to do because the laws of physics and chemistry predetermine what it's going to do. Just as a toaster can't choose to toast the Pop-Tart. You put it in, you push down the lever, the laws of physics and chemistry determine what will happen. Your brain is a machine like a toaster on this worldview. You can't choose to do right or to do wrong. When a Pop-Tart pops up lightly toasted or it pops up heavily darkly toasted, neither one of those is right or wrong, it's just a different result because there was a different setting on the machine. Similarly, when we say, yay, this is right, this is good, or oh, this is bad, that's evil, all we're doing is putting an emotional response to, and not even a chosen emotional response, but an innate and predetermined emotional response to a setting on the toaster. There is no good or evil settings on a toaster. 8b, thus there is no justification for civil law. We can no more blame a murderer for killing than we can blame a magnet for hanging on the refrigerator door. Punishing crime is like punishing a toaster for burning the toast. It didn't choose, it just had that setting, and it did what the setting determined it had to do based on the chemical makeup and structure and the laws of physics and chemistry. Number 9, life has no particular value, because it is merely a chemical state, such as the burning of a campfire. Killing and pouring water on a campfire are materially equal in the fact that they stop a chemical process from continuing. That life is a more complex series of chemical processes doesn't give it some kind of transcendent value. Compare a brick of gold to an iPhone. Clearly the iPhone is more complex, but does that make it more valuable? Well, not in our present economy. In our present economy, a brick of gold, as simple as it is, made up of only one kind of element and having no real complexity to talk of, is still far more valuable. But the value in this case, again, is arbitrary. Similarly, what's more valuable? The complex series of chemical processes that we call life, or the burning of a campfire, which is a fairly simple chemical process, but it's still a chemical process that releases heat, utilizes oxygen. They're very similar in a lot of ways. Why do we give value to one over another? And if we do give value to one over the other, why is the complex set of chemical processes that we call human more valuable than the complex set of chemical processes we call carrot, or crabgrass, or mosquito? Where does that value come from? Well, on this materialist worldview, there's nowhere for it to come from. It all comes down to our emotional response, which again is predetermined by our brain, which is a toaster. Number 9b, emotional appeals to morality are equally empty as emotions are merely a chemical state of the brain. The suffering of a victim, or his loved ones, is merely another chemical state which our brains are wired to dislike, just as thirst is a chemical state our bodies are wired to dislike. Love and compassion are also merely determined brain states. The darkness of the toast is determined by the setting on the dial. It doesn't reflect any truth. The continuing self is an illusion. Through a lifetime, human cells are constantly replaced so that the entire collection of cells, except probably his neurons, may be replaced several times over in his lifetime. Since a human is merely matter, then the man who dies is not the same man, meaning collection and arrangement of matter, who was born, nor the same he was as a child, as a teen, or a middle-aged man. He is not even a series of identical copies. Thus, he is a series of different collections of atoms spread out over time. Number 11, logically, the perception of a unified self is false. As the brain is composed of many parts which work dependently and independently, the part which says of itself, I, is no more the one brain state than a certain program which is running on a computer screen is the whole computer or all of its programs. A human brain is not an individual because it is a collection of programs running at the same time. If you have Microsoft Word open, it is not the computer nor even the primary program. It is the application which is at the front of the monitor and only controls a very limited number of functions. The part of the brain that says I is likewise only one part of the brain and only one function with a very limited control over the body or brain. Different hemispheres of the brain can conflict, one side knowing what the other does not, and the brain can be used to cause action in the body, such as the raising of an arm, which the self sees as being done apart from itself. If you can stimulate the right part of the brain, the body will respond, and the person will say, not I raised my arm, but you raised my arm. Now, here's a footnote. Here is a popular atheist named Sam Harris who is, again, saying what I have said about the self. This is from an interview where he says, spirituality is a name for all of the deliberate efforts people can make to cut through the illusion of the self, the illusion that there is a thinker in addition to the thoughts, or an ego as it is often called. So what he is saying here, in his consistent atheist worldview, is that the self, the idea that we are an individual person, is not true on atheism. It cannot be true on the atheistic worldview. And here, to show you that I am not setting up a straw man, here is a popular atheist saying very clearly, the self is an illusion. There is no thinker in addition to thoughts. Thoughts are just some of the processes that your brain does, just as toast is one of the things a toaster does. Number 12, thus there is no basis for reason or logical thought. If the brain is matter, determined by natural laws, then it cannot choose to accept as true or reject as false any information which it processes. Something known or believed is merely a particular chemical brain state predetermined by the laws of nature. 12b, the human brain cannot be trusted to choose truth over falsehoods. Since the history of mankind is one of uninterrupted religion and belief in the spiritual and supernatural, we know that evolution did not select for brains which are driven entirely by the apprehension of truth, but rather, evolution created brains which believe false premises and fail to process data logically and reasonably so as to come to true conclusions. Because the history of humans is one of consistent belief in religions and superstitions, we know the human brain cannot be trusted to merely discover truth, but can be trusted to embrace falsehoods. Even the logic or reason which is used to reject religions and the supernatural is done with those brains, which means the result of such arguments cannot be trusted to be reasonable or true. 13. Thus, we cannot know anything. We can merely have particular arrangements of brain states which we call knowledge or beliefs of certain propositions. Our brains are demonstrably faulty, choosing falsehoods over truth, and we have no free will with which to alter those facts. If atheism is true, we cannot know it. So starting with my definition of atheism, here's the conclusion that has to be come to. Atheists don't exist. Humans are merely a collection of changing matter in a particular arrangement, same as any object in the universe, like a toaster. Their unified self is an illusion. They cannot choose to believe atheism or reject theism. One is an atheist not because he has discovered it to be true, or even because he has chosen to believe it, but because the natural laws have caused his brain to be arranged in the manner which we call atheism, just as his DNA have determined his hair color and his height. Since we began by defining atheist as an individual person who chooses to affirm the statement there are no gods as true, then we must now conclude that atheists don't exist. They are not individual selves, they cannot choose, and if atheism were true, they could not know it. They may as well be toasters. Probably a lot of you are thinking, well, not every atheist believes all of these things. And that's true. Not everybody who calls themselves an atheist or agnostic would believe all of those things. But what I'm pointing out is that for atheism to be a consistent worldview, these are all the tenets of Orthodox atheism. If you don't believe these, then you are rejecting atheism at some point. Atheism conflicts with observable data. That's why there are going to be so few consistent atheists. We can choose. We have free will. Now, I've shown you there are atheists who, being consistent atheists, will deny that fact and say that no, we can't choose, we have no free will. There is objective morality, there is real right and wrong. And I think most people claiming to be atheists would say that. I've had people say to me, well, I know that kindness is better than cruelty. People calling themselves atheists will know that because it's obvious, it is a real observable fact that objective morality exists. There is real right and wrong. But if atheism is true, there can't be. We are real selves. I think, therefore I am. Again, for Sam Harris, if the self is an illusion, who is being fooled? If there are thoughts and no thinker, then who is doing the thinking? We can know lots of things. Logic and reason are reliable tools. But as I've shown, to be a consistent atheist, you cannot accept logic and reason or the conclusion of anybody's mind. You have to reject, on the grounds of atheism, that we can actually know anything. Finally, and most importantly, God does exist. This can be demonstrated in many different ways, but at some level, everyone already knows this. That's what it says in Romans chapter 1. Essentially, if you've seen the universe, if you're aware that you exist, you already know that God exists. You know the God of the Bible is true. Atheism is just closing their eyes to what they already know to be so.